I'm Marshall Kozloff. Welcome back to the Realignment. Hey guys, as you can see, we're out here in California, Simi Valley at the Reagan Presidential Library. Me and the team flew out to record a bunch of really great podcasts to wrap up the year with folks at the Reagan Defense Forum. Spoke to VCs, technologists, CEOs, and of course policymakers as we answer the big questions that really define the moment, everything from deterrence to defense production, and of course, how the military can meet the challenges of the 21st century. Hope you all enjoy these conversations. We've got plenty more of them coming. For today's episode, I'm continuing the Realignment's live coverage from the Reagan Defense Forum last weekend, following up on yesterday's episode with the CTO of Palantir. Today, I'm focused on a conversation with Joe Lonsdale. Joe Lonsdale co-founded Palantir, and today he is a managing partner at 8VC here in Austin, Texas. And of course, he's done a lot of really great, interesting writing and podcasting on these big issues, not just defense, but other topics as well, too, that fit into this building and addressing problems we see in our world and in our country. So I recommend folks who enjoy Joe's takes on these issues that they go to blog.joelonsdale.com. We'll link that in the show notes and the description as well. Hope you all enjoy this conversation. We hit a bunch of different areas, but to sum up, we're focusing on defense tech and how VCs could play a role in shaping the ecosystem and addressing the challenges we face. Huge thank you to the Foundation for American Innovation for supporting the work of this podcast and specifically our work at the Reagan Forum last weekend. Joe Lonsdale, welcome to the Realignment. We're out at the RNDF this year.
Thanks for having me, Marshall.
Okay, so these episodes are snappy, so let's just kind of get to it. You wrote a really great piece at your blog, which I've been specifically told to call out because you often fail to mention these during the podcast appearances for accountability purposes. So you wrote a great blog piece linked in the show notes talking about the responsibilities that defense VCs have. I'd love you just to open with that framing.
Yeah, well, this area is really important to me. Really proud to be here. We see Palantir's in the top of the billing now. If we used to be like the little kids trying to break our way into this space for a long time. And, we started Palantir because it was clear there was a giant gap between what was possible going on in defense and what they had. And so the number one thing was, let's make sure we make America safe. Let's deter the enemies. Let's make sure we get the bad guys. But then the number two thing is, a lot of VCs are coming in now. They're helping. It's great. People are really working on this space. We're getting the top talent in America to engage. Now that you have a lot of the best and brightest helping, I was trying to remind some people of their responsibilities because what I noticed is a lot of people, when you do get engaged in this space, it has a tendency to influence you to be more militaristic, a little more aggressive about these things. And it's really important our policy in our country is about deterring the bad guys, not about engaging in more wars. And so we have to all remember that our duty is towards peace. It's not our job to decide if war or peace, but our job is to build things to encourage peace. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was such an interesting argument because I think your central quote was that it's one thing to build the tools and the specific frames and everything like that, but it's different than to say that you should do X, Y, and Z with it. That's the responsibility of government. OS, though, our whole system of government, it's a democracy, it's a republic, whatever. Where do the viewpoints of VCs then fit within that broader country? It's having debates about our role in the world now.
I think our entrepreneurs and our venture capitalists are teaching our government about how to be more efficient, how to adopt the best technologies, how to get more for less so that money can be used for other things people in this country need and want. And I think that's a great role. I think it's okay to have a role as a voice if you have opinions. There's nothing wrong with every citizen having an opinion. Obviously, it's important, though, that the voters and that the people who are elected are the ones who are actually in charge of those things.
Yeah, so I guess the first real question here, I had Mike Slaw of the Defense Venture Summit on an hour ago, and he made the point that there were 110 different VCs that were at the big summit a few weeks ago. My question to him, which he diplomatically didn't answer, was, are there 110 defense companies to fund in the first place? What response would you have to that framework?
There's not. There's not 110 to fund that are going to be great. Now, there are 110 attempts I'm sure you could make. Listen, so I think there's been a little over 2,000 unicorns overall in America the last 20, 25 years. And I think there's maybe been about 8 defense unicorns. So not a lot. Are there going to be more defense unicorns? Sure. I already am involved in a couple more. Of the 8, I'm lucky. I've started 2 of those. I've backed 3 of them early. So I've been pretty involved in the defense side. But that's not a lot of companies, right? We've built a lot more unicorns in a lot of other areas. We've backed dozens of unicorns in other areas. And so defense. If you're a great VC, defense is only ever going to be a part of what you do. I think if you're a great VC, if you're only doing defense, you better have a smaller fund because there's not enough room. There's not going to be 20 more giant, things to fund. I think of the ones that have really worked, I think it's Palantir, it's SpaceX, it's Anduril. Those are the three primes that have kind of got to the $10 billion plus mark now. And there'll probably be 3 or 4 new primes to make that mark. And those are very important for our country. And I love that all these people are coming in, bringing talent, bringing money. That's good for the U.S., like full stop. There probably is too much money, and people are going to lose money as well, and they don't know what they're doing.
So a key point of your blog post was you've been in this business, considering the founding of Palantir, for over 20 years now. A lot of those 110 VCs, once again, I'm pumped that they're there, but my reaction as like a policy person is that it's easy at this moment to get very excited about this space. This is the kind of like VC tourism syndrome. You see this in all these different spaces. What are a lot of those VCs that are new to this business, despite good intentions, what's like inconvenient fact they're probably going to run into in the next few years?
Well, the inconvenient fact is we don't need 50 new primes, and there's not enough money to support 50 new primes. So the vast majority of what they're doing is they're going to have to build things that probably sell to the other big companies. So there's only a certain cap on how big most of them can get, with a few exceptions. And, when you're building a new defense company, it's really hard. It's really hard. These things take a long time. You're basically building 2 companies at once that both have to be A+. Because, if you're not A+ as a startup, you're dead. So you have to build something. When you build something for defense, you can't just be 20% better, 30% better. The government would rather go with the prime. They'd rather go with the thing they know. You have to be like 10 times better. You have to be so good that you're shaming them not to work with you. And so that's the product tech side. Then, once you're so good that you're shaming them not to work with you, you got to actually do that. You actually have to build a team in DC. You have to work with Congress. You have to work with the Pentagon. You got to have enough patience and staying power to do an A+ game on the Hill and be around long enough so you could finally win some of these games, which take a few years. And so most people who haven't been in this space, it is frustrating. It is much slower than a lot of other areas. And to have to be A+ at both of those things, that's rough. So I think most of them, if they haven't actually built things in this space, I'd love for them to come and fund our companies. That's great. There's cheaper capital around. Perfect. But a lot of them are going to find some of this early stage investing they're doing is a lot tougher than they know.
I'm kind of curious, now that we've reached the number of prime alternatives that we have though in the space, I think it's fair to say that maybe there's some sort of playbook that's starting to emerge. I think of your best Paul Graham essays from the 2010s or late 2008 that are coming into this early Combinator era. What are some just I'm curious if there's a defense version of do things that don't scale. That's my favorite Paul Graham essay. It's a good life advice essay in general. Yeah. Could you think of what are some general principles that folks who are interested in building this space could think of?
Well, if you want to build in this space, first of all, you need to find a place where, like I said, you could be 10 times better. That's really hard. So where is there something they're missing for some reason, or and you have to, good if you understand the reason. Usually it's because there's certain barriers people have put up structurally, or they're just taking the entirely wrong approach. So I think having that giant gap, and then the thing you have to do in this space is you actually have to be interested in Congress and in the Pentagon and in the game and how it works, as well as being interested in the technology side. And there's usually one or the other. Usually most companies in space are only really small companies because it's people are really good at the game on the Hill, but they actually have no idea how technology works. None of those guys have any idea how the top Silicon Valley technology companies work. Or you get the engineers who are really know how the top Silicon Valley technology company works. Maybe they've come from being top talent at Stripe or Facebook or whatever, but then they're really not interested in the Hill because give me a break. That's really boring stuff and it's totally different. And so, if there's a playbook here, the playbook is being A+ at both of these, and I very rarely see it.
So I'm curious then, would the ideal, I guess there haven't been enough attempts at bat for this to be a framework, but would the ideal kind of co-founder combo be a just brilliant Hill staffer and a 10x engineer?
It's interesting. I think some brilliant staffers maybe could be very helpful to these companies. What I found most of the time is that people who are running things in government aren't always the ones who know how to navigate government, ironically, because it's a very different thing. There are exceptions. So, for example, when we were building Palantir, George Tenet was very useful. He had a lot of really good strategic advice. He really figured out how all these institutions had worked after running the CIA. Most guys who ran the CIA were not good at that. In fact, 9 out of 10 advisors from DC, is they actually didn't know how to navigate DC. So I think the real thing you want is you want people who've succeeded before. This is the key thing. Is you see this in all of Silicon Valley. The most successful companies come from places where they've done it. So, for example, if you want to start Anduril, what you did is you took 3 of the best guys from Palantir who'd learned in the trenches, who'd really figured out how it worked, who had ideas about how to do it even better, and then you took America's Iron Man, Palmer Luckey, and you combine those guys, like, that's perfect.
Add a dash of revenge too. And
if we're gonna do a second company, we need a chip on our shoulder. All of us are entrepreneurs, are slightly crazy. That's just how it is. Yeah.
Something I'm curious. Like, your politics are usually described as like pretty libertarian, and something that I tend to find with tech founders is their entrance into DC is so perplexing and frustrating that they lean into legacy disruption mode, which I think is a good company building strategy. I don't think it's the best approach to DC standard. How do you balance these competing instincts?
No, that's a great question. It really is a dialectic, because I think if you're a great founder, you need to have this disruption DNA in you. But like, when I showed up in DC as a 21-year-old, that was not very good. Like, we had to have other people handle that, because people are like, "Who is this kid who thinks he's smarter than us?" I'm like, "No, it's."
Sorry, I just have a very visceral image of you, and that would not go well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's exactly. So you do need a little bit of a dialectic. You need more of like the philosopher diplomat, which was Karp, I guess. Is even though people, Karp and I both have our quirks, but you need people like him and around him who could really think about navigating institutions, with the patience to do it. And I'm a little more patient than I was 20 years ago, so now I have to do it too, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. That's why you're wearing the suit. I have my joke with you guys. You're in our space now. You're
I know. This is ridiculous.
No, and it's fair. I think the real thing that I really wonder is 2003, Palantir. You kind of summed up what the challenges were. That's the post 9/11 era. Internet is like this new disruptive thing. 2023, like, what's your kind of like diagnosis of the space right now?
Well, there's just been like an underinvestment in tech for so long. So you have like hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars really spent on this defense stuff in ways that in many cases are 20, 30 years out of date. And so you have these areas, like, for example, like logistics has totally changed in the U.S. over the last 15 years. Our firm has invested in over 30 logistics companies. We work closely with like Walmart Logistics and the UPS and like all these different big companies, and the guys who used to run them. And none of those new technologies that have totally changed everything in the commercial side are like at all on the DoD right now. Like Transcom, DLA, just way behind. And it's because they're structurally set up to keep people out. And hopefully this will change, and we're working on changing it. And so my diagnosis is that, yes, there are new possibilities with AI. There are new possibilities that we've seen emerge, through the cloud, through big data, through how you do business, and just so many areas. Just they haven't actually re-engineered themselves for any of this. I mean, even the things we've learned from like video games and controlling video games and fighting in video games, like those frameworks, we're trying to take them and like teach, because there are lessons from there you could actually teach and learn for the DoD. So we're trying to take all this stuff that's got ahead and kind of bring it over. And it's a combination of doing it in an A+ tech way, but also just how the hell do you navigate to like get these people to listen and to adopt? And it's hard, and there's a lot of good people working on it.
What problems in U.S. foreign and defense policy are tech companies, VCs, capable of solving? So, for example, a dynamic at this conference is, on the one hand, we're talking about AI and we're talking about drones. On the other hand, we're talking also about the fact that we can't replicate manufacturing processes from the 1980s when it came to our Stinger missile production. So there's this like very like defense industrial based problem. There's also this like tech problem. What do you see as the difference between the two?
Well, I mean, a lot of these problems are problems of leadership and understanding business and incentives, right? So a lot of this manufacturing stuff, we could actually massively produce like tons of Stinger missiles per year very efficiently, but we couldn't make the investments to do that unless you could sell a bunch of them over the next 10 or 15 years. Because like when you build a manufacturing plant and you do it in the right way, for like when Tesla does something, like they took them 18 months to build this amazing top manufacturing plant in the world, 3 times the size of the Pentagon in Austin, but they're doing it because they know they're going to be able to use it for 20 or 30 plus years, right? And so there's a problem with how we're buying stuff. That's more of a policy problem. On the tech side, there probably actually are ways of doing much cheaper different types of cruise missiles and air-to-air missiles and all this stuff. You're seeing obviously Roadrunner from Anduril this week. It's like the coolest new demo I've seen in a while, right? And the challenge there is you need to have a way to like allow competition into these places. And so rather than just like give a contract for Stinger missiles, which you probably should do, by the way, because we need more of them, you should also say, listen, we're interested in buying several hundred more of these per year at around this price. But whoever does the best ones that are cheaper, we're going to buy them from them. There's open competition. Come present to us over the next year or two your plan and show us what you could do. And the people who can outperform, let's give them a chance to get some contracts. Like I'd go after some of those if I knew for sure I had access to it and the money was going to be there. But as an investor, I can't invest in my companies to do that if I don't know the money is going to be there.
I'm going to try an idea on for you. So it's obviously a cliche that like, oh man, like DC is so out of date, like we need SV in here. But something that I notice whenever I speak to people like you and founders is that you're very mission oriented. And my biggest critique I have when I speak to public sector DC folks and politicians in general is they just, let's say, for example, okay, we need to be semiconductor independent. Everyone agrees about this point. But if you actually dig deep, they won't actually know what the timeline is. They'll say, well, we did the CHIPS Act, but that's just spending money. That's like you investing in a company and saying, so we've gotten to Mars because I invested in SpaceX. How can folks like you teach DC and also this is UATX related too. How can we kind of raise a new generation of leaders who are mission oriented in places outside of venture and tech?
No, it's a great question. I appreciate that. But I think by mission oriented, you're also saying actually care about the details of actually getting all the way.
I don't care that you want to do something. Yeah. I care that you can actually accomplish it.
And it's something that comes from actually just having done things in the real world. This is where I'm very biased that we probably need more people. Like I love Doug Beck in the position running DIU because he actually has been involved in some of the top companies in the world actually getting these things done, right? We need more people like him in the defense innovation complex. And there's a lot of great people there who haven't built things before who are great and they're smart and they're part of it too and they're needed. But I think until you have more people who have been in the world of running a business, of helping run a business, of actually getting actual results over 5 years, over 10 years, it's going to be very hard for them to know what that's like. And so I think it's partially, you almost can't blame them because they haven't done it before and they haven't experienced it and they haven't experienced the iterative process to learn. So I mean, the solution to me is let's bring more of those people in and let's mix the DNA to help them have the long-term missions and get the things right.
What does a mixed DNA US look like?
Well, I've met some people even just this time who are like the great strategic minds, like working with our Secretary of Defense, working with our country. And it's really fun to talk to them about, why are we doing this in space and this with our bases in the Pacific and they're all this strategy. Like one of them was correcting me yesterday, Joe. It's not just that we need more small bases in the Pacific for refueling, is that they should be owned by our allies as well, because that way China's more hesitant to bomb them because if there's a war, they don't want to bring all of the other countries into it. There's things like this that they're really smart and they're thinking about ahead of what I thought about because it's not my area of expertise. So you do need those great strategic minds. You do need people who've come up running actual battle scenarios, actually coming out from special forces, coming out from running brigades in the army. So you need all those people. But let's also have people who have built companies, who built innovative companies, who know how to run innovation teams, who know how to get things done with technology teams in the real world, because that just looks very different now than it did in the past. And I think the reason we don't have this is if you go back to like 1950, 1960, a lot of the best innovation teams were in the federal government. And, I think 1950s Balaji, a friend of mine, likes to say, was like the peak of centralization, right? Everything kind of was decentralized and became more centralized, and now it's becoming more decentralized again. And there's lots of reasons why innovation was so expensive. You had to do it through big companies, through the government, 70, 80 years ago. So the government was kind of used to being the best. And now the world's decentralized enough. The very best innovators get rewards in companies, not in government. So you have to kind of now realize, okay, there's a gap. We're not as good. We have to learn from these other parts of the economy. And they're slowly starting to realize this. Like the cyber guys are slowly starting to use this stuff, from the commercial world, not just internally. But it's a learning process, and they're still not bringing in that DNA properly yet.
I'm curious about your relationship between the word expertise and your actual work. Because expertise is a really frustrating word for me when it comes to foreign policy, because it's not just knowing the CIA fact book, world fact book by heart. It's also judgment and wisdom and this or that. I think we saw a lot of, I'm very pro-Ukraine, but I think there were a lot of folks who, and this is David Sachs collecting scalps on X, a lot of folks would say, I'm an expert. The counteroffensive is going better than you think it is when it just wasn't. So I just wanted to hear, and also when I were to hear the word expert, right, that means you're knowledgeable about a status quo. So how do you think about the word?
Yeah, when I hear the word expert, I'm usually very skeptical. I've built billion-dollar companies in a lot of areas, but I'm definitely not an expert, am I an expert at starting companies? I think that's actually dangerous. I think you're right. As soon as you call yourself an expert, you're like saying, look at me, I know what I'm doing. That's when reality usually comes and smacks you over the head. It shows you don't know what the hell you're doing at all. And, foreign policy experts have got almost everything wrong consistently, right? I mean, foreign policy experts told Jared Kushner he couldn't do what he did in the Middle East, and he defied all of them, and he got the Abraham Accords done. And it's one of the most amazing accomplishments in the Middle East, and it was completely against the advice of the experts. So, yet in general, especially in foreign policy areas, very skeptical of experts. I think I think these people, they don't live in falsifiable worlds very often. And so I think they're overconfident. I generally, I'd much rather have like smart people who iterate and learn than people who think they're experts telling us what's going on.
Well, this actually goes to your point, Balaji's point about, peak centralization, which is that if it's peak centralization, organization in the 1950s, then yeah, you can without consequence say, no, Joe, I'm the expert. My big company is a better addition than your small company. Fair. That's not a way to conduct yourself in 2020s America.
It's not the way the world works anymore. And you're seeing such big gaps that the experts are much more likely to get kind of shamed much more quickly now. So I think they got to watch out.
Yeah. So the question, it's not that we're pushing back against expertise or learning things. It's just I'm fascinated about how people conduct themselves in shifting environments. So
if you look at the culture in Silicon Valley, one of my favorite books recently was this. I interviewed my friend McAfee at MIT, and they talked about the principles of the top corporations.
The Geek Way.
Yeah, it's really good. And I think I think it's all about like speed and iteration. You don't do like expert plans. You basically like have a plan, but then you iterate and you learn and you change. Like even with these replicator efforts that are going on right now, it's like the experts could say it should be exactly this way or exactly that way. And the actual thing is, let's just do the high level thing correctly, and let's try it, and let's iterate quickly and learn. And all of us could sit around saying what experts we are, or we could actually just learn from the real world and get it right, and keep changing it up to make sure it's better every week.
So I think for the last two questions, number one, you've just got a bunch of like interesting institution building projects. I really admire that about you. I think there are a lot of people who do well in tech, and then I think take that as an excuse to kind of separate from a society that they're frustrated with. What is your advice for getting more people to just operate that way?
I appreciate that. It's a great question. I mean, obviously working on policy with Cicero and working on a new University of Austin, and it's
we joined the board here too. We were just discussing that. Like you're participating.
No, I'm participating. I mean, I care about America. I've thought a lot about this, and a lot of my friends have left the country quietly in most cases, and someone disappeared off the grid after making $1 billion and helping with something. And that's their right to do that. That doesn't mean they're bad people. But I mean, it's not who I am. I think hopefully we could have more role models that actually fight for our values. I think Elon, frankly, is doing a great job of being a role model who fights for his values. He does it in a way that's different than the way I do it, but he is standing up. He's saying like, this is our country. This is where we're going to make our stand. And that's like, and I feel an affinity to people like him and others like that. And hopefully we can be role models for a lot more people to say, listen, America is not perfect, but this is where we're going to make our stand. We're going to do whatever we can to fight for it. And so, I mean, yeah, let's try to set the example. And I think you're going to see others do it too.
Let's close here. You've done a lot of interesting writing about the frontier. I'm really obsessed with this. And also it helps the route in Simi Valley. Like you could just look outside, and it's literally beautiful. I love, this seems like a developing project of yours. So just close on that. It's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, well, I think it's always more fun to work in the frontier than work in the core. We talk a lot about there's different dialectics of values, and you want to be somewhere where things are falsifiable, where you're on an adventure, where you're trying new things, where you're not held back by all the different bureaucrats and all the different rules. Like there's an attitude on the frontier that anything is possible, and we're going to go for it. But there's an attitude in DC. I find this even with some of the people here because they spent so much time in DC. Like, oh, you can't do it that way. That's not possible. Just not what we do. And the frontier is more like, what's the right result? Let's figure out how to get there. We're going to get there. And things that are on the frontier are functional because they have to be functional, because otherwise they break and you don't have any backup. And so, we really need more of America to feel like a frontier again, to keep growing, to keep expanding. And I think that bold spirit is what's going to keep us a great country. So let's keep pushing for it.
Joe, that was great. Thanks for joining me on the Realignment.
Thanks, Marshall.